think we're going to have a great crowd and a nice discussion. Claire, wonderful. Thank you for being here. From the coast of Maine, Wabanaki people of the John. Brett from Los Angeles. Thanks for being here, Brett. Wonderful. Elvita from Detroit. Russ, great. I'll just read out a couple more. Susan and Jim from Oak Park. Maria from Chicago. Liz from Westchester. Oh, this room is really filling up. Wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody. It's great to have you here. So I'm Anna Garcia Doyle, the Executive Director of the One Earth Film Festival. I just want to welcome you to our virtual screening and discussion, which we hope will present rich opportunities for learning and provide a brave and safe space for important conversations that matter deeply right now in our country and across the globe. So this beautiful film about Native American food sovereignty really spoke to me as someone whose love for food is also central to my culture. Look for one of my favorite scenes where beautiful tastes of the landscape are served up at Cafe Gozu, including a dish with Anasaki beans, which are thousands of years old. So just a little tip for you, something maybe to watch out for. I'd like to just take a moment to acknowledge our sponsors, without whom we could not do this work. So thank you to Mother Jones, to the Walter S. Mander Foundation, to the Brushwood Center of Ryerson Woods, and First United Church of Oak Park. Another quick note, if your circumstances allow, please donate to support One Earth's nonprofit year-round screening events, youth programs, and more at oneearthfilmfest.org. We'll just share a few more notes. Thanks.
We are thrilled you're with us as One Earth Film Fest celebrates 10 years of inspiring change and utilizes the power of film to spark change on topics of environment and those intersected with environment, like social justice. The fest has had to adapt to a virtual format, but we strive to stay true to our model. While we're not physically together, we are here together, live, virtually, still able to create community, become aware of issues, engage in dialogue, and be inspired to act. African-American activist Angela Davis said, "You have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world." The stories in our fest films reflect that possibility. Our collective actions will achieve that possibility. Our event will take place in 4 parts. We'll introduce you to some folks who will help us have a great discussion after the film. We'll then watch it together. Then afterwards, we'll unpack the film's themes in a facilitated Q&A with our wonderful panelists. Please participate by using the chat to share thoughts, ideas, or questions. We'll end by sharing concrete actions you can take to be part of the solution. These actions come from our panelists and other action partners. As we live current movements and reframe narratives around justice, environment, and bringing innovative, equitable solutions to our climate crisis, we're hopeful for the future. I am grateful to the knowledgeable filmmakers, film subjects, facilitators, and panelists joining this and other fest events. They'll guide discussions to help spark and sustain actions for the protection of our One Earth and for the just treatment of its resources and its people. We've found that shared agreements help keep our conversations safe and respectful. Please observe these agreements when participating. Put aside your preconceptions, acknowledge your privilege, internalize what you've learned, approach the conversation with respect. Engage your active listening, use I statements and get comfortable with your own story. Acknowledge Native peoples who came before us in protecting our land. One last thing before we meet our facilitator and program participants. If you're active on social media, tell people this is happening. Amplify these voices and be part of the community we're building here together. The hashtag for the festival is #OEFF2021. Thanks again to all of you for being here. And now I'd like to turn it over to our facilitator to introduce themselves, the panelists, and our...
Hi, my name is Maddie Oatman, and I will be your discussion facilitator this evening. I am a writer and senior editor at Mother Jones, and I'm just going to introduce you to kind of a slightly different way of thinking about watching this film. So we often watch movies and then kind of walk straight out of the theater back when we could go to the movie theater without really reflecting on what we've seen or how we felt about it or what implications it has for our lives. So today we plan to have a rich, thought-provoking dialogue sparked by Gather. And we're very lucky to be joined by knowledgeable, committed panelists. So we're really looking forward to having you participate, enriching the dialogue with your reflections and questions in the chat, and exploring ways to take action. So I am so lucky to be joined today by two wonderful panelists. We have Danielle Hill of Heron-Hill LLC, who appears in Gather, so you'll see her soon, and Kaylee Warren of the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance. So we're going to learn more about both of them after the film. So now, without much further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our film. Gather is an intimate portrait of the growing movement amongst Native Americans to reclaim their spiritual, political, and cultural identities through food sovereignty, while battling the trauma of centuries of genocide. So enjoy the film. We'll see you afterwards to hear from our panelists and have you join in our post-film conversation. Jody writes that she was really struck by the juxtaposition of the enormous mound of buffalo carcasses to the new herd of 400. I think she might be talking about the historical photo of that huge mound of skulls, or at least for me, that photo of just like the enormous mound of skulls was something that seared into my memory as I watched the film. So I'm not sure if that's what Jody means, but brought that up for me. Michelle, it's not the Industrial Revolution, it's the Restorative Revolution. Yeah, I mean, if you think of the, I think, you know, it's basically thinking of this movement as the counter to what the Industrial Revolution was. So it's as if we've kind of torn apart our food system, or the relationship of our food system with the earth, and now it's time to put it back together. Quixote also writes, restorative revolution was a line that stood out to them. Amy, something she remembered is beautiful things take time to make. Julia writes, Mother Earth is talking to us. Emily, what are you going to say to future generations? How did you fight for what you have? That's a good one. Jenny, food sovereignty is tied to specific land, but I was struck by the coast-to-coast and international connections between communities. Absolutely. I feel like you could make the film Gather and include, you know, projects and people working on this from around the world. Maybe for the sequel, we'll get to know more. Caroline writes that this film showed the beauty, strength, and resilience of the Native community. Amy wonders, this gets me thinking, am I really humble when it comes to eating, cooking, etc.? Emily remembers the food hunt in the desert, in this case, avoiding rattlesnakes and catching rats and eating them tasted like chicken. I think this film made me realize I could probably eat a desert rat. Like, it does not necessarily sound appetizing, but the way that the film talked about it and about the tradition of doing that and how this was sustenance for people living in Arizona and New Mexico, you know, thousands of years ago. I think probably Twyla Casador or others in this film could probably make it taste pretty good. Well, great. Thank you so much for sharing your initial impressions. We're going to have some time for you to ask questions of our panelists soon. So please start thinking of those, get them ready, and there'll be a time to drop them in the chat shortly. So as a reminder, of who I am. My name is Maddie Oatman. I'm a writer and editor at Mother Jones Magazine. And I spoke to Sanjay Rao, the director of the film, and wrote a piece on the film in the fall. And, you know, during this time of pandemic, like, I think it was just one of those films that really made me feel connected to humans and humanity again. And so, yeah, I think it's just powerful. And especially right now where we're all so isolated, I'm just very grateful for having this film in my life this year. So I am here with two wonderful panelists, and you just met one of them when you were watching the film. Her name is Danielle Hill. Danielle works in various capacities for tribal governments, tribal organizations, and Native American nonprofits, consulting on a variety of Indigenous issues. Danielle is a student midwife and doula and is passionate about reviving Indigenous birthing practices, promoting food sovereignty, Indigenous farming, and maintaining Eastern woodland traditions. She is also the co-owner of the Wampanoag Trading Post and Gallery, and that's where she is right now. So you'll see some gorgeous art behind her soon, and that's in the Trading Post and Gallery. And she's a member of the Wampanoag Nation Singers and Dancers. As a citizen of the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe and raised in Mashpee all her life, she has witnessed many sightings of blue herons on Cape Cod. However, more recently, almost a dozen have been found mysteriously dead on tribal lands in Mashpee. In many cultural mythologies, the heron symbolizes balance, self-reliance, and an ability to progress and evolve. So Heron-Hill LLC, her consulting business, was formed to continue to raise awareness and appreciation of this great bird. And then, along with Danielle, we are joined by Kaylee Warren. So Kaylee is the communications coordinator for the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance. She is Tewa and Tiwa from the Pueblo nations of Santa Clara and Isleta. She grew up farming with traditional Pueblo agricultural practices with her family on her Tewa homelands in northern New Mexico. From this land-based upbringing, as well as through community and professional mentorship, she became a passionate advocate for ancestral lands protection and the preservation of Indigenous foodways. Kayleigh was a founding member of several grassroots organizing efforts and a tribal policy coalitions, which engaged Indigenous communities in the ongoing movement to protect ancestral sites and cultural resources in the Southwest. She has worked in native plants preservation, monitoring and cultivating threatened and endangered plant species in both Oregon and New Mexico, including many species of ethnobotanical importance. Most days she can be found farming her family's fields in New Mexico or exploring the diverse flora of her homelands. So welcome, Danielle and Kayleigh. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
So I'm going to start by asking you a few things, but audience members, while you're watching, please start adding questions to the chat, and we are going to get to a few of them soon. So Kayleigh and Danielle, I am wondering if we could just start, we've all just watched this film, and I'm curious the first time you watched it and kind of got this, these collective stories, what your initial impressions are or how you felt. Maybe I'll start with you, Kayleigh. Oh, sorry.
Sure. Danielle, if you want to go ahead.
Well, I thought the film was beautiful. It was so wonderfully just laid out. It had a really nice pace to it. You really, felt like you were really listening in on these stories and sort of feeling what, these folks are going through. I really commend Sanjay and his team for putting this out there into the world, because, the food sovereignty movement in Indian country is definitely gathering a lot of momentum, and this is the perfect time for more non-native allies to get involved. So I just hope that, everyone just spreads this film and watches it many, many more times. I feel like I can never watch this film enough times, so.
Yeah, I think I would echo a lot of the same sentiment around watching the film for the first time. I think it was quite an emotional experience, I think, for me, seeing it for multiple reasons. One of them being that I think that in my lifetime, this is one of the only times that I can say that there's been a film garnering as much attention as this film has. Something that features the voices of Indigenous people from a variety of communities, and really paints a beautiful but also sad picture of what the reality is like for our communities. So it's very beautiful in the sense of how it's laid out and all of the stories of hope and resilience that it carries, but it's a very real depiction of something that a lot of our communities are facing. Watching it, I can think of, I'm reminded of people from my own community who are, people I work with who echo the same, statements and strive to have the same impact as the amazing folks who are featured in Gather.
So Danielle, we heard a little bit of your story in the film, but basically, you're part of the tribe that fed the pilgrims, and so I'm wondering, and we saw a little bit of that in the film, a discussion about that, but I'm wondering if your tribe has access to those foods that would have been around, 300 years ago.
That's a great question. And besides, encountering the settlers and showing them how to plant and gather and survive, thus feeding the pilgrims, we are still here. We've never been relocated or displaced. So our tribe is about 2,800 members, and we're all mostly still living on Cape Cod or in the surrounding areas. The majority of people are living in Mashpee. So we still do have access to all of the fish and the shellfish that we were eating 400 years ago in 1620, as well as the wild game, the deer and even some of the smaller animals like the rabbits and the raccoons and the squirrels. We're still eating and hunting, and then we still do forage for all of the berries, cranberries, strawberries. We have a strawberry Thanksgiving every year. We have a herring day, so we celebrate when the fish come down for the first time in the spring. So we have many Thanksgivings, and we're still honoring all of these plant and animal beings. And we are one of the few tribes that still exercise our Aboriginal hunting and fishing rights. That's something that we've never negotiated away or gave up. We still exercise that, and we have access to all waterways in Massachusetts, regardless of if it's on private land or if it's, gated off. We still can access our original waterways for the purpose of hunting, gathering, and fishing. So we're pretty active with, still maintaining our traditional foodways. And we do have a variety of different chefs and tribal catering businesses in our tribe where people are promoting eating indigenously and eating like our ancestors. And, we'll have stands at powwow, or we'll go around to different socials or events to make that food accessible and available, as well as educating ourselves and the public on, these are the things that we used to eat and we still do eat.
And Kayleigh, you still farm on your family's farm in northern New Mexico. What are the types of things you're farming there?
Yeah, so similar to Danielle, my people are also very blessed to have never been relocated. We're still located on our ancestral homeland that we've been stewarding for thousands of years. And with that, we've been able to carry with us the traditional ecological knowledge around our farming practices and maintain a pretty traditional set of practices around how we plant and feed ourselves in that way, utilizing the same traditional irrigation techniques and planting techniques that have been used in this area for a very long time. And I was very lucky to grow up in that life way, in the agricultural life way of the Pueblos, because as much as you'll hear in the Gather film, people have said we're salmon people. In the Pueblos and for a lot of tribes in the Southwest, we're corn people. And so we're very lucky to maintain that relationship with one of our core foods that has, carried us through so many years and through so many hardships to this day. And so my family, we cultivate several varieties of corn, not just the bright yellow sweet corn that many people are accustomed to seeing in the grocery stores, but we grow blue corn. Our family has grown red corn in the past. We grow white corn. And each corn has its own preparation and purpose within the community. It's something really beautiful about our planting styles is they encourage diversity and encourage the exact opposite of a monoculture, the exact opposite of what contemporary agriculture has become. So we intercrop with beans, with several varieties of squash, which are one of the only seed varieties that I would say are sort of untainted by genetic modification. So we're very lucky to still carry those seeds within our bundles and to still feed our community with these seeds and these foods as part of our agricultural lifestyle.
This is making me hungry. So,
Me too.
So real quick then, what's something you would make with, you just named 3 types of corn, the blue and the red and the white. What's a dish that you would make with one of those?
Oh, I mean, we wouldn't really use all 3 corns at the same time. Each corn is really beautiful in that it has its own property and it has its own way that it presents itself as a food. For example, the blue corn is something that we use primarily as a flour corn. And so we utilize it, like my family will utilize a lot of our blue corn for making blue corn mush, which is a popular breakfast. It's kind of like a porridge sort of that you make with the ground blue corn. Or you can we make savory and sweet tamales, something that people might be more familiar with. That's big in our region and something that is traditional. And as for the red and the white corn, those would be more so used in stews or soups after they've gone through a process that makes them more bioavailable and softer. So it's tending these corns and tending so many different varieties of our ancestral crops, you get to know that each of them is diverse and different and beautiful in their own way. Similar to all of the food cultures in each of our regions. I think that's something that Gather represents very well, is that food sovereignty looks different everywhere. There's not one brand of food sovereignty. And that's something that I think is modeled for us by our ecosystems and by the environment around us.
So there have been ongoing challenges for tribes in different areas to stay connected to their food traditions. And Danielle, the Wampanoag Tribe has been involved in a dispute or a lawsuit with the Department of the Interior. Can you say a little bit more about that, or what's going on with trying to overcome that barrier?
Yes. Unfortunately, our tribe has been in a lawsuit since 2016, when we applied for land into trust for 321 of our acres. A small group of citizens in the town of Taunton, here in Massachusetts, they filed a lawsuit against us with the Department of the Interior, claiming that we shouldn't have land into trust and that we didn't fit the definition of Indian. And so it's really kind of absurd and bizarre, and it just is another example about, how society is misinformed about the sovereign status of tribes, and even federal Indian policy over time, how it has evolved. And it's unfortunate because this lawsuit has really halted a lot of our economic development projects. Specifically, one of our gaming projects had to stop. Some of our housing development stopped. A lot of our grants stopped. We had to lay off a lot of people, about 85 different folks working in our tribal government. So it really made a negative impact to our tribal economy, having to now, spend time and resources and money that could have been used for more progressive issues directly affecting tribal members. Now it has to be, proving to some non-native group that who we are, and why we are Indian. And it's just ridiculous that, the dominant culture wants to coin us as the tribe being, the ones that fed the pilgrims. But in 2020, we're still having to prove who we are, just because we want to help uplift our tribal citizens. And, that is a threat to some. So most recently, though, there was a positive impact, and with the change in administration, this small group, they're called the Littlefields, they decided to pull out or drop their appeal. So that's really positive, and now we're just awaiting decision from the Department of the Interior now under the Biden administration to issue a determination on our status so we can move on and put our land into trust and continue with our economic development aspirations.
That's interesting. It's certainly something I think a lot of viewers will be interested to keep an eye on and keep track of. So, Kayleigh, with your work with the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance, I imagine you've come across a lot of really interesting projects and initiatives, or groups working on food sovereignty and reconnecting with food traditions all over the country. So I'm curious, if Gather, I think it's an 83-minute movie, but if it were 166 minutes, or just could expand and include more stories, like what's one or two that you feel like would have to be in there?
Yeah, I mean, there could be many gathers. There's so much happening across the country, ranging from the efforts of individuals who are working with their communities to achieve food sovereignty in their own way, to coalitions of tribes and various groups who are coming together to assist each other, because, it is true that we really need to cultivate solidarity And between our nations, we can help each other out a lot. And one of my favorite parts of this work is just seeing the efforts and networks that are built between people who are involved in this work and have these intentions of wanting to create better, healthier futures for our people. And there's so much happening in that realm. And it is part of NAFSA's work to help tend those alliances and build connections between people who are involved in these things. Some of the efforts that I would uplift are I'm really inspired by groups like Hobitatsqua Permaculture Institute and Flowering Tree Permaculture Institute, who are both institutes here in the Southwest. Hobitatsqua is located in the village of Kikotsmovi in Arizona on the Hopi tribe, and Flowering Tree Permaculture Institute is located in my home village of Santa Clara Pueblo. And both are doing work in, both helping to build resilient agricultural environments for our communities, which are both located in very arid areas that are facing the impacts of climate change really head on. This year in New Mexico, we were told by the state's engineering office that if you do not have to farm, do not farm. So this year we were actually told that the situation with our water is so dire that we've actually been told by the state to not do it. And so it's really important that we have these institutes doing this crucial work to educate our people on how to feed ourselves really in the days to come, and to adapt our systems and our environments to where we'll be able to still thrive in these regions. I'm also really inspired by larger groups like the Traditional Native American Farmers Association, which are connecting our farmers with other Indigenous agricultural groups internationally to learn from each other and, again, build those connections. And the TNAFA, the Traditional Native American Farmers Association, also does a tremendous amount of work in providing skills and seeds on the ground, and really getting people the tools that they need to actually implement food sovereignty in our region. And the list can really just go on and on. There are so many groups and people that I'm continually inspired by and learning from in this work. And I really encourage people, if you would like to, learn more about our alliance, NAFSA is continually uplifting these voices as often as we can. And I guarantee that wherever you are in your region, there's somebody who is doing this work.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think all of us can find work like this around the country. And I feel like that's something that's easy to forget, but that this film was a great reminder of. So on that note, I actually have a great audience question that's kind of a segue. But Garen wonders, what are ways non-Native folks can support efforts toward food sovereignty and Indigenous representation in agriculture?
I'm happy to take that question. I really think that we appreciate the support that allies can offer in uplifting these efforts. I think that Gather has done a tremendous job in just exposing people to this reality. I think that there are a lot of people who didn't know what food sovereignty even meant before seeing the film, or who still don't know what that term means and why it's so crucial for our community's survival and sustainability. So continuing to uplift the film, continuing to uplift the voices and the work of the people who are in the film helps a lot. But also contributing to these efforts when you can, assisting in land restoration, land rematriation is the word that we like to use a lot at NAFSA, as opposed to repatriation. We like to say rematriation. And so bringing our people back onto these landscapes so that we can exercise, our inherent right and our, ability that's been handed down to us to really tune in to what, the earth is needing at this moment is something that I think allies can offer a lot of support in doing.
I would agree. I always encourage folks to purchase native food products. IndianAg.org has an amazing list of native food producers from all over the country, and they ship food and food products out often, and anything from your cornmeal or your choke cherry syrup or your coffee. There's so many products out there, your smoked salmon. I feel like that will help, number one, support financially a lot of these organizations. And then number two, you're directly experiencing, the product and the efforts and the, blood, sweat, and tears that these folks are putting into by consuming them and ingesting them and being part of the process. So I think that's one of the ways that I encourage folks to help be a part of the movement, especially when it comes to, indigenizing your Thanksgiving. I have this conversation a lot, what can folks do? And I always encourage them to eat locally and, attempt to support just the native foods out there that would have been eaten at the time, to have just maybe a more authentic experience, and to always, have gratitude for these plants and animal beings, because, as Kaylee touched upon, some of these farming practices look different than the monoculture, agricultural farming practices that are done in other parts of the country. So people are putting a lot of energy and spirit into these plants to help them thrive and grow, even down to how the harvesting process. So sometimes these products might be in small quantities or at a price point that's, a little bit more than some of their competitors, but it's worth supporting these food companies, because tribes, as you can see, are much smaller, but their approach to sustaining some of these plant animal beings and the seeds is just completely different. So it's definitely like a specialty product that people should keep in mind. And the website again is IndianAg.org. It's the Intertribal Agriculture Council that does an amazing job with putting on food sovereignty conferences, whether they be virtual or in person, around the country at different tribes, highlighting some of their efforts. And it's just a great organization. So I would check it out.
That's great. Thanks for...
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add, also encouraging everyone to not let your education stop with this film. I really encourage people to read books. There are so many inspiring and beautiful books coming out from Indigenous authors about food sovereignty. There are podcasts now to look at. And I really think that, if you take a look out there, there's so many resources that are made available to continue your learning. And I think that's a really big part of being an ally, is to never stop learning.
I think this question has mostly been answered, but a different way it was phrased was, what is the appropriate role for the non-Native community in the food sovereignty movement? And so if either of you have any more thoughts on that.
The appropriate role. Well, I think in whatever role, you want to take as an ally, it starts with a mindset. Going into any sort of tribal environment or tribe, or even when it comes to just trying to educate yourself, similar to sort of some of the suggestions that were laid out ahead of time, is just to observe and just to have an open mind, and to take what you can back home and try to adopt it in a way that feels comfortable to you. So a lot of these approaches to growing food or saving seeds, anybody can do. So to me, that's very important. When it comes to understanding the atrocities and the abuse that's happening to our natural resources, anybody can be a part of that movement, whether it is, like Sammy and his youth, they're concerned with the dams and the waterways and how it's affecting the fish. I mean, wherever you are in the country, there is definitely something that can be done in terms of preserving our natural resources or our animals or our plants. So you can do that as an individual. And then I would just suggest, wherever you are, is to be familiar with the history of your land, what tribes are around you or have historically once lived where you are, and just be sensitive to that, and also educate yourself on, if tribal people are still in the vicinity, what are they going through? What are they facing? What are some of the barriers and the challenges that some of these tribal nations are trying to overcome? And educate yourself on that. And if you have some sort of opportunity to sort of spread on behalf of them, spread their message, in a way that would be helpful, or writing letters to your senators or congressmen. I mean, there's always ways to help. So to me, it's a mindset. I'm not going to say, oh, if you're non-native, you can only do this. I mean, so I'm not saying there is one appropriate place to be, but in your mind, just understand that, just being empathetic to the struggles that are still going on today, and just educate yourself. And definitely do something, whether it be small, anything is better than nothing.
Yeah, I think Danielle provided a really good answer there. And I'll just, echo it. I think allyship there's not one way to do it. It's very situational. It depends on where you are, what resources are available to you, what's happening around you. But, again, put in your hours, that's a good way to sum it up, I think, is just any effort is good. And, just encouraging empathy, of course. Mindfulness is very important, being aware of, are you taking up space or resources from people who really need it around you, from tribes that are really needing it around you, and really trying to stay in good relationship to the land. That is something that helps us all universally.
So Jody has a question about the scene. I believe it was on the farm in Arizona. The story about finding seeds on an architectural dig and actually growing them was amazing. Do you know other ways that traditional foods that have been lost can be brought back?
Yeah, well, seeds are a major part of that work, and something that NAFSA has devoted one of our programs to. One of our programs is called the Indigenous Seed Keepers Network, and one of their main lines of work is in seed rematuration, which is the work of returning seeds that have been removed or lost to the tribes that they call home. And I think that's one very tangible way that lost foods, can be brought back to their tribes. We've seen so many examples through our work of, beautiful squashes and beans that have been tucked away in a museum, that have been sold for years in a private collection, that have been returned to their home tribes and now are being distributed widely like the Anasazi beans, and are returned back to their home food cultures. So that's a really tangible way that this happens, and happens, quite often. And NAFSA is very honored to be able to facilitate that return, because it's very powerful and it's so needed in this line of work, because there is a lot of knowledge and tools and our seeds that are kept from us still to this day.
That's amazing. I would want to learn more about that. I'm curious, Kayleigh, because you mentioned how, because of the drought and the, water pressure of the Southwest right now, you're not even allowed by the state to do much farming. Have there, is part of the looking at seeds, is that, also looking for seeds that might be more resilient under climate pressures or going forward? Like, can you talk about,
Yeah, 100%.
connections there?
Yeah. So, one of our legacy in the Pueblos, as well as in many of the other Southwestern agricultural tribes, is that over hundreds of years, the available moisture of each year, and through that worked with our seeds to tend seeds that are drought tolerant, or even can be dry farmed, which is essentially farming that utilizes no irrigation at all. These are seeds that can be planted at the beginning of the year and will grow and survive on whatever minimal rainfall they receive. And there are tribes that actively practice that type of agriculture. And something that, the organizations that I named are actively participating in bringing back to the forefront, and really educating people about and providing the knowledge and the tools to be able to, resume farming primarily with that method. Because in some ways our farming traditions have been corrupted by colonial farming traditions that taught us that you have to utilize irrigation in a specific way when you don't really, especially in this region where our people have survived for thousands of years without doing it in that manner. And so in many ways in the Southwest, I think what we're looking at is more so of a return to our more traditional practices, because those practices are adapted to our environment and are adapted to the desert and to drought and are resilient.
And that's so hopeful too, like, I just feel like there's so much to be worried about, but the fact that we've had this wisdom, or that your tribe has had this wisdom and can kind of recover it and put it back to use to help us survive is, there's something very hopeful about that. So.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, resilience is a way of life, I think, is something that I talk about a lot. And I think we are all tasked in this lifetime of trying to return to the teachings of the people who came before us, because, we've survived to this point for a reason, and there are very specific, life ways that have gotten us here. And so we can't forget those, especially in such trying times.
So, this kind of is an interesting question, follow up to that, which is Charlene wonders, so when we're evaluating solutions for food deserts, is there a place for commercial industrial food production and distribution?
That's sort of a tough one. I would say that I don't believe that food production is something that, also there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution for all of us. I think that we really need to look to our environments and, return to the rhythms of the regions that we're in and look to what's available locally and develop local food systems that are adapted to the resources that are available to us, instead of trying to, continue the contemporary food system practices, which are aimed at, I think, providing the exact same thing to everybody everywhere on demand. And I think we really need to dial back on that, because it's not sustainable.
I would agree. I would agree with what you just said. I think there are local, innovative, progressive ways to address, the issues in food deserts. I don't think that they have to be. I think that's the only way. I do.
One of you mentioned some of the amazing books that that are out there or are coming out on this topic, on the topic of food sovereignty, and I wondered if you had any on the top of your head, or if not, if you could add some to the chat. We had a request from Kristen.
I had just posted one. I'm not sure if it showed up, but I just got it on Amazon. It's called Indigenous Food Sovereignty in the United States by Devin Mehuswa and Elizabeth Hoover. So that I just got that literally earlier this week. I've been looking at it for a while. And then there was another one that I had I'll always promote the Sous Chef's Indigenous Kitchen by Sean Sherman, because I love cooking, and his recipes are so inspiring, and he includes some of the history and some beautiful pictures from his tribe on how they, for example, dried squash, and it's just a beautiful book. So that's by Sean Sherman. So I always give that book out to people for presents or Christmas. And then the other one I just got was, oh my gosh, it was The Seeds Tell Us Stories. I'll have to look it up. Kaylee might know. Or The Land Speaks to Us. I'm gonna have to Google it real quick.
Yeah, I think what would help, I can name some authors. Devin Meheswa has some really wonderful literature that they've put out. They also have a cookbook. I think it's called Reclaiming Our Ancestors' Gardens, something along those lines. But Devin Meheswa is a great author. Elizabeth Hoover is wonderful. We're very lucky to have her as part of our board for NAFSA. And that book, Indigenous Food Sovereignty in the United States, I think that would be an amazing starting point for a lot of people. Enrique Salmon is a really great writer. He has a book called Eating the Landscape that I think is amazing. And of course, we all love the Sous Chef. That's an amazing resource as well. And I think once you're authors through their work, they really do well at sharing the mentors that they have, the inspirations that guide their work. And, from there, you can become acquainted with the beautiful network that is Indigenous food sovereignty and the minds who are fueling, the education and theory around it.
Well, those are some. Danielle, I wasn't able to hear that. Can you repeat that? I don't know if everyone heard that.
Yeah, it's the one I was thinking about. Kaylee just said it. It's Eating the Landscape, American Indian Stories of Food, Identity, and Resilience by Enrique Salmon. So that's the one I just couldn't think of. But thank you, Kaylee.
Yeah, of course. That's such a great book. That's the one that I'm always giving people. I'm like, you have to read this.
I'm excited to look that up and read it. Thank you. And I will attest to the Sous Chef being a great book for learning, but also just the recipes are so delicious. So check it out. And I guess ending on a final question, I would love to hear from each of you, when you, getting kind of into our foodie side a little, when you prepare a meal that you feel like speaks of your tradition or, can teach the person eating something, about the tribe that you come from? Like what's an example of a meal you might cook?
I don't mind starting with that. So we historically have always ate fish and shellfish. And so one dish that we'll have, or we'll just eat, whether it be raw or cooked, would be hard shell clams. And those are called quahogs, which is a word from our language. But we use the shell for jewelry, and that is what wampum comes from. So if you've ever seen the wampum belts with the purple beads, that's from the hard shell quahog clam. And so we wear them, and we still adorn ourselves with the jewelry, and it still holds value. I sell a lot of it here at the gallery, and we have a lot of artisans that are still making wampum jewelry in a traditional way, with some modern tools, but with also using other natural materials like copper and wood beads and things like that. But I'm always peer pressuring my friends when they visit, like, you got to try this shell, you got to try this clam, or you have to eat oysters if you come visit, like you have to have fried clams, like you have to eat the salmon roe or the herring roe. And so we're big fishermen out here, so I couldn't live without anything shellfishy. Like I could eat that every day, all day, and that's what we did eat. So we drink the broth, and historically we gave our babies fish broth and different like wild onion and wild garlic, and fish broth was a very nutritious broth that our babies and our young ones would eat, for all their nutrients and their minerals. So and then seaweed's the other thing. We still cook it, we still eat it, we use it to flavor our food, we eat it dried, and then we also use it to fertilize our soil when planting.
That sounds so delicious. I'm hungry now. I guess on my side, when I'm thinking about Pueblo cuisine, we love our stews and like slow cooked soups. And I am somebody who really believes in the message that food is medicine. And I believe that, stews and soups can really be a great medicine for so much. And I really love to incorporate my stews and soups with, of course, the full range of what I can have on hand from what we're harvesting from the fields. But also there's a really beautiful dynamic in Pueblo cuisine that balances the wild foods and herbs particularly with our cultivated foods. So I think bringing those two together within a stew is something that I think is a really perfect depiction of our food culture, but also something that is at its core very nourishing and healing.
Yum. Nothing better than a good stew. So we're going to move on for a moment just to think about actions. After being so inspired by a film like this, and also a conversation like that with such incredible panelists, I think it's great to take a moment to think about some of the actions that you might be taking after watching this. There's a quote by the activist Robert Swan, which is, "The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it." So, after letting that sink in for a second, what actions are you going to take to be part of the solution? And, feel free to add those to the chat. Those could be actions anyone could take, or they could be actions communities, organizations, governments, and companies can take. So the next slide that you're going to see summarizes some top actions submitted by our panelists, as well as by tonight's hosting sponsors, partners, and team. So I'm going to call out some of the actions. So live lightly on the earth, Native American recipes, and eat at Native American run restaurants and cafes. Like hopefully Cafe Gojo will be open for us to all eat there soon. Communicate and learn more about Native food sovereignty, the story of the relationship between Native lands, traditional foodways, and people. Read publications at First Nations Knowledge Center. Flex your citizen muscle, vote, organize, write, or call, consider climate issues on national and global levels. Support efforts to reclaim Native American land through land trusts and voluntary taxes. I know here in the Bay Area, there's the Shumi land tax that is a voluntary tax that can be paid for, living and inhabiting Native land. Support. Invest and divest, donate, sponsor. The First Nations Development Institute is a leading Native nonprofit based in Colorado. That's something you can support. And probably the most accessible is connect with nature. Start a seed bank in your community. Volunteer in your community garden. Attend or host a traditional cooking class or foraging event to gather your traditional foods. So hopefully that's given you a few ideas. We're going to be sharing with everyone these take action points and the recording of this discussion and the transcript of the chat with the ideas and resources that have been shared. So don't worry. Finally, I just want to say thank you to our incredible panelists, Danielle and Kayleigh. I learned so much just talking to you for this short time, and I hope we can, continue to learn more from you. And, stay in touch and aware of the amazing projects you're both involved with. Thank you so much for giving so generously of your time, your wisdom, your experiences, and your stories and your perspectives.
Thanks.
As we close out, I just hope you felt a sense of One Earth's 10-year theme of inspiring change throughout the film, in the discussion, and in how we came together to build community around these critical issues. If you would, we'd love you to tell us now in the chat about ways you are ready to take action to make and inspire change. What do you feel compelled to do as a result of tonight's event? I'll read a few of them out as we wrap up here. I don't see any, but I can say I'm feeling very inspired to learn more about land trusts and, ways that Native communities are figuring out how to reclaim and maintain access to land. And learning about ways I can support that effort. Jody says, cook a Native American dish. Yeah, and I feel like we always learn so much when, by reading recipes and just going through the process of sourcing ingredients. And so at one point, Danielle mentioned, buy Native foods. So maybe when making that dish, it could also be sourcing locally, buying Native foods, and then cooking a dish. Advocate for rematuration. plant even more native species in my garden. All right, well, those are all really great ways to take action. To learn more about our panelists and stay in touch with their work, see the links on this next slide. Remember, you can tweet, post, or share about what you just experienced online and in social media. And, you know, as I'm doing, just tell everyone to see Gather. If you found value in today's event, you can support the One Earth Film Fest and join again this week, Earth Week in April, and throughout the year. And last but not least, a huge thanks to each and every one of you for being here and participating. Let's give all ourselves and our program participants one last round of applause. Thank you. And see you soon at another screening.